Indra?
This call is now being recorded.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone who's joined with us today. Today we have gathered here for a session on India-Pakistan, is there a way forward? So on this occasion of 75 years of partition of India and Pakistan. So we are here gathered today with all our esteemed panelists to discuss on this topic. So we have with us today Lieutenant General Kamaljeet Singh, who was Executive Council Member, Global Counter Terrorism Council, and former GOC INC, Western Command, Indian Army. Uh, he commanded the Sikkim Corps having borders with 4 countries, including Siliguri Corridor, commanded armored divisions and 1st T-90 Armored Brigade. He was commended by Chief of Army Staff and also twice by Eastern Army Commander, cited for bravery during UN peace building mission in Angola by UN Force Commander, and was also awarded by Punjab government on 550th century of Guru Nanak, and several other accomplishments of Sir are included. Next in the panel, we have Dr. T.C.A. Raghavan. Sir, former India High Commissioner to Pakistan. T.C.A. Raghavan is a former Indian diplomat who was 1982 batch officer of the Indian Foreign Service. Dr. Raghavan was the former Director General of Indian Council for World Affairs. He has considerable experience in South Asia policy issues and considered an expert on Pakistan studies, including heading the Joint Secretary, the Division of Ministry of External Affairs in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran Division. We are uh, we are really glad that we have with us Ambassador Abdul Basit, who was former Pakistan High Commissioner to India. Abdul Basit is a retired Pakistani diplomat who served as the former High Commissioner of Pakistan to India. He was appointed to his position in 2014 and was based at the Pakistan High Commission in New Delhi. Previously, he served as Pakistan's ambassador to Germany from May 2012 to March 2014. During his career, he has been posted at Moscow, New York, Sana, Geneva, and London. Next with us, we have Lieutenant General Asad Durrani, former Director General of the Inter-Services Intelligence. Lieutenant General Asad Durrani joined the Pakistani Army in 1959 during his military career. He was an instructor at the Military Academy and Command and Staff College. He also headed the Military Intelligence and the Inter-Service Intelligence. He's a graduate in German General Staff Academy and was later the Defense Attaché in Germany. He's a veteran of 2 wars, 1965 and 1971, against India. After retirement from the army, he was Pakistan's ambassador to Germany and Saudi Arabia. We also have We also have with us a few more people. We have Smita Sharma, who's a contributing editor, India Head News, and hosts People's Editor. She's an award-winning independent senior consultant, columnist, and TV commentator in India. She writes in Hindi and English on foreign policy and security issues for ETV Bharat, Huffington Post, Dainik Bhaskar, and other news platforms. As a contributing editor, she hosts People's Editor on India Ahead News. We have in our panel today Munazi Jahangir. She was a co-founder of Voice Pakistan, voicepk.net Pakistan. She's an award-winning TV journalist and a documentary filmmaker, currently working on Dawn Media Group. She was an executive producer, anchor, and special correspondent at Pakistan's Express Media Group. Thank you for joining us. Today's session will be moderated by Professor Amitabh Mattu, who is a professor, visiting professor in International Politics, Organization and Disarmament and Studies of International Studies from JNU. He's also visiting professor from Stanford University. He's also a member of Governing Council of the Pushwar Conference on Social and World Affairs. He's currently president of the Indian Association of International Studies. Professor Mattu has been a member of India's National Security Council's Advisory Board and was a member of the task force constituted by the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on global strategic developments. Without taking much time, I will hand it over to Professor Amitabh Mattu to carry forward with the session. So today's topic for the session again is India, Pakistan, is there a way forward? Thank you. Thank you all the esteemed panelists for joining with us.
Sir, you are on mute. Kindly unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Indra Chite Patkone. Next time, remind me to give you an updated biography. I hope others have sent their latest CV, because my CV, which was read out, reminds me of my life in various parts. But anyway, thank you so much. I must commend, first of all, GCTC and Aditya Tikku, my great friend, younger brother, Kashmiri at heart and from Kashmir, for organizing something like this. I didn't think that this was possible, that you can actually do these things. And I've tried to find out from Ambassador Raghavan, how does Aditya manage to do all these things? And his, I think he was as curious as I was. But Aditya, the fact that you're able to bring together this stellar panel of Pakistanis and Indians to speak about India-Pakistan relations after almost 75 years is commendable. Congratulations. We have 4 speakers, but we also have a large number of interested opinion makers, commentators. I think it will be fair, and I see Mr. Vikrant Kutiala, who has also surprised us with his presence here, and so many others who are deeply engaged with the India-Pakistan relations. So what I thought was initially give all 6 of our initial panelists just 5 minutes each, so that we can actually have a robust discussion. And I thought I'll pose to you 3 questions. First question, which is the historical question, which is, after 75 years, what is your net assessment of India-Pakistan relations? How do you see India-Pakistan relations having unfolded over these 75 years? Was this the expectation when partition happened? I know 2 of our panelists have written books. Ambassador Raghavan is also a PhD and has written a book on the people next door. And Ambassador Basit has written about his experience as High Commissioner of Pakistan, rather mixed experience where he took a stand contrary to what the establishment wanted to do. And so I think that is an example of someone who's spoken his mind in a very forthright way. The second question is really, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Let's not reduce this to a diplomatic panel, and when I say reduce doesn't mean any offense to diplomacy, but merely in terms of just being polite. Let's not just try and say good things, but do you see any light after the end of this tunnel? And finally, and for me the most immediate and the most urgent question, we see the unfolding of the greatest humanitarian tragedy in our region after Bangladesh, in Afghanistan. As a lay observer, I could see it happening. Everyone convinced me, no, it's not going to happen. The Taliban have changed stripes. The Afghan National Army will put up a greater resistance. The Americans have a plan B. Nothing of that sort. Kabul, if things go the way they have done, will fall to the Taliban, and you will have a regime which could be most politely described as antediluvian, xenophobic, as Imran Khan pointed out, as well as deeply resentful of the neighborhood generally, and a cause of great instability, as I see. So let me pose these three questions, and Aditya, unless you already have a set order of speakers, then can I just pick and choose between one Pakistani and one Indian alternating? Would that be fine? Let me begin rather unusually then, since Aditya has kept quiet and given me the freedom to decide, and I take a carte blanche rather seriously, to ask probably a more youngest member of our panels to speak first. Not only because I am a great admirer of Asma Jahangir, and Munezeh may not. Munezeh has a separate, definite identity, an important identity of her own, and know as a son, one doesn't like to be reminded of your father's achievements all the time. But in this case, I have such deep regard for Asma Jahangir as one of the great pillars of South Asia, who we lost a few years ago, but also of Munezeh Jahangir as one of the most independent, thoughtful voices in the media in South Asia. Munezeh, if you do me this favor and begin this conversation. If we don't have Munezeh, then I pass the baton to Smita Sharma.
Hi, Professor Mattu. Am I audible?
Absolutely audible.
Right. It's lovely to see all of you. Ambassador Raghavan, Ambassador Basit, also General Durrani, and you've put me in a tough spot. There I was hoping to get enlightened by all the wise men in the room, and you've asked me to start the rolling process. But I think it makes it easier because then the audience can actually be enlightened by the wiser men later on who will value add to what I have to say. Frankly, as a journalist who's been actually reporting on the story for almost 17, 18 years now, I leave the scholarly, the academic aspects, the historic aspects for the panelists who are way more of course, well informed, not just about the current, but about the past and what went into the making of the past and all the other issues. But I think in terms of, Professor Mattu, what you said about the vision of India-Pakistan relations in the past 75 years. Now, the biggest problem today that I feel as a journalist here is the relationship has somehow managed to be reduced to such volatility consistently. The only thing consistent about the relationship in all these years and decades has been the volatility. So we've gone through phases of the highs, we've gone through phases of the lows, and unfortunately, the problem is that, of course, before I come to the current situation, we've seen some years when before High Commissioner Basit was here in Delhi, in the years previous to that, The India-Pakistan stories has always been one which is defined by ordinary people of either extreme hostility or extreme, in fact, the sudden moments of where you see all these camaraderie, this brotherhood, but somehow the relationship has ended up making the South Asian identity hostage in a way to the bilateral aspects of the relationship, which to me personally has been a very, very unfortunate part, where you see most of the South Asian identity through the prism of what these two neighbors have been doing or are still doing. And you've been holding the relationship with the other countries as well, hostage to how things play out between New Delhi and Islamabad. Now, when we stand at 75, you look at the phase in the 90s, of course, the wars that have been fought in the past. You look at the phase in 2004 to 7, which is a phase that we talk about in the recent history the most in terms of what historic opportunities did come our way and when the two countries could have sorted out a lot of issues. Unfortunately, all of that seems to be so much in the distant past now. And what has happened to me as a journalist, what I feel personally is the distancing that has happened between the civil societies, the distancing that has happened even between journalists in the two countries. We have unfortunately reached a spot today where even trying to reach out as journalists whose job is to report beyond borders is laced with so much of fear and apprehension of some sort of a smear campaign being run against us, of people even questioning the fact as to why we are reaching out and talking to the neighbor, why we are reaching out and talking to either the civilian population or the political voices within Pakistan, or for Pakistani journalists to be interacting with their Indian counterparts. That hardening of the civil society space, that shrinking of the space for dialogue, I'm very pleasantly surprised to see that forums like this are still having this kind of a conversation. In 2019, I actually traveled to Islamabad to be a part of a Track 2 dialogue, which I think was a Track 2 dialogue that was being held in either India or Pakistan after a long time. I remember Pagwash, I think, used to do a conference or two in Islamabad, but that also stopped. And mostly whatever Track 2 conference that we had was being held in Bangkok under the Chowfrey Dialogue umbrella network. So for even this dialogue that we had in July 2019, this is after, of course, Pulwama had happened, Balakot had happened. We thought maybe there was a momentary window where academics, lawyers, scholars, youth, essentially, they did not have, they all had a very youth representative. People could sit down on the table and talk to each other. But that too seems once again to have gone out in the past. For me, the biggest worry in India-Pakistan relations today, as I see it, is that until and unless we don't create windows of opportunities for people to be able to sit down on a table, talk to each other, be able to question each other's policies without being labeled, without being boxed as XYZ, as a raw agent, as an ISI agent. At the moment, I don't really see an appetite politically, definitely not, for things to move forward. So the way forward for now definitely seems to be to try and at least go back to take very few steps, very few baby steps, where you can just maintain a base minimum level of dialogue without any high expectations or the lows. And even that base minimum benchmark has become so difficult that unfortunately for me right now, I'm starting off with a very dismal sort of a view of things to come. Professor Mattu, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Very, very poignant and extremely precise comments. Thank you very much, Smita. And now I'll request Ambassador Bassett. And Ambassador Bassett, as I said, is someone who's seen as having views which were harder than the official establishment. I would like you, Ambassador, to reflect on the three questions and also to reflect on how Fayaz had, the great poet of the subcontinent, in this great poem, Subhai Azadi, had described that moment. Ye daag daag ujala, ye shab kasida seher, wo intizar tha jiska, ye wo seher to nahi. Perhaps has that morning of freedom that we had hoped for come in your vision, and where does that take our bilateral relations? Where does that take what is happening in Afghanistan? Is there a road through Kabul to greater cooperation, possibly? But I will not anticipate your remarks, sir.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you very much, Professor Mathu, and my gratitude to the center for inviting me to be on this very esteemed panel. As I look at the Pakistan-India relationship, it saddens me to see where things have come. And we yet again find ourselves in a cul-de-sac, and we do not know how to get out of this blind alley. Frankly speaking, we during the last 74, 75 years have tried every possible approach to move forward, to find possibilities for our two countries, but we have been taking one step forward and two steps back. And more often than not, we would hit a snag, we would face again and again log jams, and all our energies would be consumed in breaking those log jams. We would engage with each other for 4 or 5 years, talk to each other under different frameworks, but yet, and we would achieve a few things here and there in the form of CBMs, but unfortunately, we have not been able to break the vicious cycle of mutual distrust and hostility. We have fought wars, and there have been, as Samita very rightly pointed out, there have been ups, lows and highs in our relations. But we have not been, the two sides terribly failed to work out sustainable mechanisms wherein we find solutions to our problems. I have now come to this conclusion that no matter whichever approach we adopt at the end of the day, Pakistan-India relations will continue to be hostage to mutual hostility unless and until we find solutions to our major problems, core problems. And here I must mention the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Some people do not agree with me. They still believe that perhaps the best way forward is to take baby steps, try to have a congenial environment through confidence building measures, people to people contact, cultural relations, economic relations. But our experience tells us that we have tried all these things in the past, and nothing has really worked. So much so that we have tried confidence building measures related to Kashmir in 2005 and 2007. Even those confidence building measures have unraveled over time. So my feeling is that now in Pakistan, particularly after 5th August 2019, the steps which India took in the context of Jammu and Kashmir, there is no appetite left in Pakistan to really engage with India in talks for the sake of talks. Though there have been some back channel interaction, and we saw as a result of that interaction recommitment to the ceasefire along the line of control. But then things have again, even those contacts have discontinued, and we are again searching for possibilities. There is no doubt diplomacy is the art of the possible, but unless there is mutual desire, political will, and the two sides muster courage to take decisive, difficult decisions, I do not see as to how the two countries can move forward. Unfortunately, in the case of India, we have seen how Pakistan is still an election issue. And every time there is election in India, we have seen that the rhetoric is kind of is ramped up. We see every time this happens, we unfortunately lose more time to reach out to each other, and this pattern continues. I am not very hopeful under the given obtaining circumstances about this relationship. We may, I do not know, 1 year down the road, we may have some, process in place. But unless there is some desire to move forward decisively, there is simply no room for any improvement in relations. And we have seen our hostility reflecting in the region as a whole, also in Afghanistan. It is how ironic it is that in Doha, Qatar is forced to arrange two separate meetings where India and Pakistan, are present. It has come to this pass that our two countries can't sit in a meeting where both the countries are present related to Afghanistan. So things have become very demoralizing, and South Asia would remain hostage to Pakistan-India hostility. We will not be able to take advantage of the opportunities unleashed by globalization. It is so unfortunate that intra-regional trade continues to be under 5%. So these things, and then the global politics itself plays out in our region. As India,
I ask you to conclude so that
yes, as India, US are fostering their strategic partnership. Pakistan, obviously, we have a strategic partnership with China. That also negatively is affecting Pakistan-India dynamics as well. So this is what my initial remarks are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab. Rather a bleak prescription for the future. Nevertheless, I think important as perhaps a reality check from across the border. May I, before I request General Kamaljit Singh, and may I request Ambassador Raghavan to perhaps cast a historical lens as well as take a look at what's happening in Afghanistan. I'm told that the latest news is that Ismail Khan, who was described as once as the Lion of Herat, has been taken prisoner by the Taliban. And of course, the Charge d'Affaires of the United States has said that the Taliban statements or commitments in Doha do not resemble their actions in Badakhshan, Ghazni, Helmand, and Kandahar. Attempts to monopolize power through violence, fear, and war will lead to international isolation. I wonder what Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad is now doing at that moment. But over to you, Ambassador Raghavan.
Thank you. And very briefly, may I echo what you said about Aditya Tikku and GCTC. It's always wonderful to see how GCTC and Aditya managed to put these programs together. I'd also like to echo what you said about Asma Jahangir. I do think people like Asma Jahangir are the reason why there is still a great deal to be positive about in South Asia, and her untimely death was a big setback to that process. I'm also very happy to be part of this panel along with everyone, along with the others who are all very good friends. But I'll turn very briefly to the three questions you had asked, and it's also a good thing that GCTC has asked you to anchor this conversation because you have so much knowledge and understanding not just of the issues and the processes, but of the people involved. So thank you very much, Dr. Tikku. First is net assessment after 75 years. You know, to me, it's something quite puzzling that despite this great intimacy in terms of knowledge and understanding, which India and Pakistan claim of each other, is that I do sometimes feel that neither takes the other seriously enough. So in India, for instance, we think that somehow India-Pakistan differences are something which have been conjured out of nowhere. And in Pakistan, the view is that somehow issues which are central to their understanding of India-Pakistan relations can be secured in some manner, despite whatever problems which may exist. So Kashmir is a good example of that. In India, we fail to take into account the fact that K in Pakistan stands for Kashmir. In Pakistan, similarly, it's not taken seriously enough that everyone in India feels that Kashmir is the integral part of India and will remain so. So the net assessment after 75 years is that both countries have a serious and genuine disagreement which is tied to their foundational worldviews and self-assessments. And that there is no way out of this disagreement. There is no magic bullet, or there is no rabbit to be pulled out of a hat which can be then presented as a solution. This is a central problem that you have dealing with in many ways, a problem without a solution. And therefore, a lot depends on what choices governments exercise and what choices citizens of either country exercise, given this genuine disagreement. As Abdul Basit said, in the past, from time to time, different portfolios of choices have been exercised with various degrees of success. But I see it very much as an open question, which is what makes me positive. And I come to the second point which you raised, that is there light at the end of the tunnel? I remain positive because a lot depends on what choices will be exercised at a particular point of time. The choices will keep changing, and which is why I think to be positive, one has to be philosophical about India-Pakistan relations. And despite this serious and fundamental disagreement which exists, not see it as a problem which is unique or sui generis. But in fact, if you look around the world, you will find that there are this kind of serious disagreements or fundamental disagreements in many neighboring country situations. And often countries are successful in finding a way out of this fundamental disagreement, and in other cases they are less than successful. So if you look at Israel and its Arab neighbors, you have one set of options which comes up. On the other hand, if you look at Korea and Japan, South Korea and Japan, or you look at Japan and China, and similar Malaysia and Indonesia, you realize there are other options which have been exercised, which led to more positive outcomes. So yes, I don't see light at the end of a tunnel in terms of a golden dawn where you will have a permanent state of good India-Pakistan relations. But I do see possibilities of positive movement from time to time if the right choices are exercised by both governments. But I also see it as, because of this fundamental disagreement, as a friction-ridden relationship which is going to be prone always to accidents. So I would say that I'm positive, but I also think that yes, we have to be prepared for setbacks from time to time. Your third point about Afghanistan. Now, Pakistan on 14th August, India on 15th August, Afghanistan National Day, I think, on 19th August. It does suggest some kind of a fateful triangle, perhaps even fatal triangle. But I don't see Afghanistan as central to India-Pakistan issues. Afghanistan has become a certain factor in India-Pakistan relations, given the nature of the adversarial relationship which has existed for a very long time, in fact, since 1947 itself. But it is an outcome of that adversarial relationship. It is not central to India-Pakistan relations per se. So I'll stop with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Raghavan, for answering all the three questions, and also particularly for suggesting, which is that Afghanistan is not central to the bilateral relationship, no matter what happens. I mean, it's not intuitively obvious, but it's an important point which we need to reflect on. May I now just bring in General Kamaljeet Singh, Sahab, with three questions, and also with the added caveat that in my experience, while the armies of the two sides are the ones who are prepared to fight each other, go to war with each other, but are also most understanding of the consequences of war because they suffer the most. In that context, as well as the larger historical relationship, Sahab, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Professor Mattu, for this opportunity. And GCTC, of course, like everybody has said, I'll also echo the same sentiments. Sometimes I tell our friend Aditya that if in Delhi, if they ever have a problem of forming government and they have to get people together on one platform, GCTC might be able to get everybody together because it has got that kind of capability. But when talking about this subject, after having fought 3 wars and 2 half wars, war in Kargil and proxy war which is going on in Valley, Kashmir, it was wonderful that in February this year, there was an agreement on ceasefire on LOC. And that was after 4 or 5 years of very heavy caliber exchange of gunfire and incessant kind of exchanges. So it was wonderful. And there are those, strands or glimmers of hope, like when Neeraj Chopra says, even if my compatriot from Pakistan was on this victory podium, Asia ka to naam ho jata. So these are the things which, so fire up your imagination. But realistically speaking, there seems to be a certain kind of fatigue in Pakistan army and to a certain extent in Indian army also about the futility of this exchange on LOC. Does that give an opportunity? Is there is a realization in Pakistan army that it will have to focus on the on its western frontier towards Afghanistan, because this problem is not going to get resolved in a hurry. It will take its time. And there'll be a refugee crisis, there'll be spillover effects, and there is this problem of Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. That also has to be taken care of. So if that be so, is Pakistan army genuinely realizing that you have to invest in trade and economics and walk away from this, as has been said by its chief? So that is another issue. And like Ambassador Basit said, that he alluded to Indian side. But let me take it to the other side also, because picture has to be completed. I agree that in India, the external and internal dialogue has got horribly mixed up. We have brought our public discourse to a level of immaturity where India is a strong cultural power, and we should allow our culture to permeate on the other side, because it takes centuries, but this culture has healing effects. So to that extent, while we have become hostage to it, but it's not as if Pakistan has not done it, because when this LOC agreement happened, there was this wonderful opportunity of trade in sugar, cotton and all, and then Imran Khan was put under pressure. that you can only do this much and not beyond this. Maybe that was done under pressure from UAE and rest was not followed up. So both sides have got horribly mixed up in trying to appease the so-called nationalistic constituencies on both sides. How to walk away from here is a question. And Afghanistan does give a certain kind of opportunity. See, what has happened is my biggest fear is something a little different also. Pakistan Army and Pakistan has ascribed to itself the responsibility of being ideological guardians of Islam. And they say ideological frontiers have to be guarded. And here I am very worried. This year, on Eid ul-Zuha, even the Indian Twitter handles said Eid ul-Adha. It didn't say Eid ul-Zuha. So Khuda Hafiz has become Allah Hafiz, Ramzan has become Ramadan, and Eid ul-Zuha, which I grew up with so many years, I had a near tussle on Twitter to educate people that DOPT surplus says, but then somebody tells me that the PMO is tweeting Eid ul-Adha. Why are you saying Eid ul-Adha, Eid ul-Zuha? So this so-called Milijula Mustarka or Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, and it's ironic because see, Islam was getting nurtured in Barelvi and Deobandi school here. We have Chishti order where even Ziaul Haq and Parvez and everybody come. Are we going to allow Pakistan to walk completely towards Central Asia, towards Middle East, and jettison whatever linkages socio-cultural are there towards the South Asia? Because SARC has been in suspended animation. Since 2014, we've not had any summit. 2016 was cancelled. So these are very, and the world has to take that call. Because now, currently, Saudi Arabia and UAE are facilitating the process of moderation of this so-called Islamist or political Islam. So, but then every time moderation happens, there is one Qatar, there is one Turkey, and to nurture this. So in this conundrum where Taliban is going to throw up this kind of question once again, I think call should be taken, and it will be a wonderful idea somehow. UAE has managed to persuade India and Pakistan to have a LOC agreement. To answer these questions very quickly, the first is it's a story of missed opportunities, wasted opportunities. It is deceiving and cheating your population because they didn't want it. It is just some constituencies who want this agenda to be taken forward. Do I see hope at the end of the tunnel? We must remain optimistic. We should not give up because it's not going to be easy. Like what Ambassador Raghavan, who's always I enjoy hearing him. But then right choices must be made at the right moment, and we must invest in those. So with these thoughts, I think I'll pass the baton to Ambassador Mattu, who will take it forward. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jansab. I've been waiting for Pakistani guests to come in. They've had some commitments, but they're going to log in shortly, I'm told by Aditya. May I request, and since I have a natural affection for Jammu and Kashmir, so Vikrant Kutiala from Jammu to speak and reflect on whether business and trade, that's what General Saab mentioned, is that a way forward still? I mean, I know there have been attempts made, but can economics, trade, and business mitigate the conflict? Vikrant, putting you on a spot there. Vikrant, can you hear me?
Yes, Amitabh ji, I can hear you.
Please.
Hello.
We can see you as well, Vikranti. Please, I don't know whether you heard the last question which I posed to you, that after the panelists and some panelists from Pakistan are going to join us momentarily, but I thought that you could reflect on whether trade and business is something which is a way in which you can. Also, let me say this: Mr. Kutiala comes from a formidable legacy of a family of corporate leaders who owned the old Awari Hotel or the Nidos Hotel initially. Were you the first owners, second owners of the Nidos Hotel in Lahore?
I'm not sure, Amitabh ji. My grandfather was there, but I'm not sure if it was the first, second, or what. But Amitabh ji, coming back to your original question, see, the only way forward, really, I mean, leave aside the optics and leave aside government-to-government interaction. The only way forward is when you have actually cross-holding of stakes across both countries, which essentially brings in trades, business, trade, and, chambers of commerce and things of that kind. Unless and until we have linkages, with commercial and other interests in both countries, the future is not going to get any better. Because as of now, the entire discussion is on issues which actually are historical in nature, really. And the only way out of them is to have stakes, stakes and counter stakes. The economies need to be integrated to the extent possible, so that there are pressure groups within both sides to kind of prevail upon the hawks on both sides to take it easy, to come down. You and the panel here is extremely, educative, and I would think probably it's extremely enlightened panel. We've had so many near misses where issues were on the verge of getting resolved and somehow we lost the thread. The boundary disputes and all, they are there, and if we've not been able to untangle that knot for 70 years, it's not going to happen for the next 5, 10 years, 50 years, I don't know. So your original question, to my mind, that is the only way forward. Bridging, making stakes, having cross connections, having, groups which have interests in the welfare of the other nation. That is my personal feel on this.
Thank you very much, Vikranji, and thank you very much for responding also at very short notice. I think you reflected a larger body of opinion within this country. Now, Muneze, I'm told, is going to join us in 5 to 7 minutes. In the meanwhile, I would like to have one substantive intervention from the floor. Not a question yet, but substantive intervention. I see former Cabinet Secretary Surinder Singh there. Would you like to intervene, sir? He's left the meeting. Is there anyone else who wants to make a substantive presentation right now before we allow for questions from the floor? Or one of the panelists who felt that we had shortchanged them in terms of time, if they want to reflect a little more. Smita, did you feel shortchanged because I gave you spoke for a lesser amount of time? Do you want to come in again for a bit?
Sure. I'm glad to hear, in fact, all the comments made by Ambassador Raghavan and also General Singh as well, High Commissioner Bassett. I think the problems today, when we reflect on the India-Pakistan relations, what is the most important thing to consider is the individual identity of the two countries, how they have shaped up over the last 75 years. Of course, during partition, whatever the idea was that there would be two independent countries with two, of course, an Islamic country with a democratic value to it. India, of course, being the strong democracy, we take pride in it. But the way the politics of the day has shaped up, and it's not just in India, I think it's been a global phenomenon where we have seen the right of center come to power in so many ways, and with the right of center governments in power, the kind of majoritarianism views that we have seen on display, the kind of nationalism rhetoric that has set it to our narratives. I think somebody just mentioned, General Singh just mentioned, that how it is very, very sad that our public discourse, in fact, has been led to a level of horrible immaturity. That, to me, today seems to be one of the bigger roadblocks when it comes to thinking about taking forward the relationship. Because going back to my original point, that why forums like GCTC today have acquired an importance is because somewhere we have stopped the dialogue process, not just the official dialogue, the government dialogue, the political dialogue, but just the dialogue between the academics, between the people, the level of distrust that used to be identified at the political level. For the longest time that I have traveled to Pakistan, when I have come back to India, a very common question that has always been asked to me by a common Indian in the newsroom or in my family has been, "Kaisa mulk hai Pakistan?" कि पाकिस्तान में भी लोग क्या वहां पे बड़े बिल्डिंग्स होते हैं, क्या पाकिस्तान में सड़कें अच्छी हैं? I'm sure a lot of the Pakistani youths that I remember having interviewed, when they went to pursue their higher education in countries, in overseas and in foreign countries, where they met Indian citizens and ended up being friends with them, a lot of their ideas about India was challenged, which was very, very different from the ideas that were being percolated through the textbooks that they had grown up, through the narratives that had been set out by the military, by the establishment, or by the government of the day. So on the one hand, where Pakistan has to decide moving forward, what is the nature of the Pakistani state going to be? The military-civilian complex that we talk about, the kind of imbalance that we see, of course, a country that has seen military coups in the past, and where even though you still have an elected government, but so many questions are raised about the government being in power, or whether it's again a civilian puppet government. Which is the way that Pakistan chooses to go from here today, as both countries prepare to celebrate their respective Independence Day. In terms of India, we have a right-wing government here that, of course, is very, very different from what the past governments were bringing to the table. On foreign policy, normally, we like to believe that things are a continuum, regardless of which party comes to power. Things have changed for sure. And for the way this government has operated, it has also brought about several changes to the very fabric of our country today. The way not just our common masses, but our elites think. The erstwhile liberals, we have seen a lot of people turn from doves to hawks for reasons that are justified, for reasons that are also being created because of the kind of politics and polarization that we're seeing play out today. So in India itself, the idea of India, what we see going forward today, I do agree that Pakistan sells in India as a domestic election rhetoric. You will not see the kind of hammer and tongue approach to China, despite what is playing out in the line of actual control, despite all the bloodshed that we saw in Galwan. But what happens in a drone attack in a Jammu airbase will always perhaps have more domestic electoral resonance in India. So both the countries moving forward here, I think at the crossroads, before we talk about the bilateral relations, we have to see where are the two countries headed themselves as individual nations. What is the idea that is driving them? What is the polity that they are aspiring for? And only after which, yes, Ambassador Raghavan, I used to be called one of those jhole walas, mombatti walas, who always go in and light candles and are calling for peace, because I argued that Jaw is better than war. But despite that, the way I have now seen the conversations shift, the narratives shift. So yes, I do agree. It's not the end of the light at the end of the. There is some light at the end of the tunnel, but things will take time. At least in this current government, in the next 2 years, where we are again going to get into the mode of elections, be it Uttar Pradesh coming up next year, be it the national elections coming up in 2024, how much of a political appetite there is going to be, and for a government that does believe that firmly believes that they are correcting historical wrongs. Now, we may debate whether that by itself is right or wrong, but this government's narrative is for sure that a lot of historical wrongs had to be corrected, a lot of bulls had to be taken by its horn, which they have managed to do on a lot of issues, be it on 370, be it on 35A. Now, of course, we are talking about other issues too. So I think in both India and Pakistan, before we can even begin to think of, no, I don't see a solution to Siachen, a solution to the Kashmir issue happening anytime soon in the next 5-10 years. But can the two countries at least continue to be neighbors that can tolerate each other without going to war every time, without being at each other's threat every time? That will be driven by considerations within the domestic priorities and which way the two countries are headed as individual nations. You'll have to unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you very much, Smita. That's extremely useful. I think that intervention really placed relations in a context. Of course, there are two people who have asked for time. I'll ask them. I'll also request Ambassador Raghavan, now that he has detached himself from administrative responsibilities, to perhaps reflect on what. I'm part of a counterfactual project, and I know this is going to be the most politically incorrect counterfactual project, which I'll suggest to you, Ambassador Raghavan. What if partition hadn't happened? If you look at the social, economical, foreign policy, what if it hadn't? Counterfactual is something historians say is the worst way of analyzing anything. But let me request you, Ambassador Raghavan, that we will provide you, or I, in my humble way, will provide you all the resources needed to lead a project like that. And if you can get Ambassador Bassett to commit to collaborating, that will be even better. But before that, the two people who wanted to intervene is Nikita Singla, who I Googled quickly and realized that she is someone who's worked on India-Pakistan trade and the opportunity costs of that trade. So I'll ask her. And Mr. Ravinder Pandita, who I think has led a movement to ensure that Kashmiri Pandits get access to Sharda Peeth. So Nikita and Ravinderji, 2 minutes each, please. Because we have now the other panelists joining us formally.
Do I go first, Professor Mattu?
Yeah, in the order that I mentioned, yes.
Sure. Very good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nikita Singla. I'm Associate Director at Brief. And as Professor Mattu said, I have been doing research on India-Pakistan trade for almost 8 years now. And actually, when Pulwama happened, I mean, we saw that 2019 was the lowest of India-Pakistan trade. And it was general that media in both the countries was flooded with this narrative that India-Pakistan trade is hardly anything for it to impact national economies of either countries. But I think what we did forget in that narrative is how it is impacting our border economies in both the countries. And I decided to travel to Amritsar. I decided to go to Uri, to Poonch. It was my first time in these border regions along the LOC. I met all the traders, the laborers there. And we realized through our research that over 50,000 people just in the Atari region and over 25,000 people in Uri and Poonch were affected because of their sole dependence on cross-border trade with Pakistan or cross-line of control trade with Pakistan. So I think when we say, oh, you know, how does India-Pakistan trade hardly matter? That is when this question comes that let's look at these border economies. By virtue of their geographical location, they are solely dependent on cross-border economic opportunities. And in the absence of such trade, what is it that we can do? And I would end my interpretation with actually a question, Professor Mattu, that you can direct to any of the panelists, which is on one side, I think we often juggle with this question that how do we create more economic interdependence so that we create more room for India-Pakistan bilateral relations to improve. And on the other side, through our discussions with governments in Punjab and J&K, we have been trying how to insulate the traders in both, in both these border economies. so that we create alternate avenues of livelihood for them. Because a trader in Amritsar, we want to see how can he access other opportunities, let's say through the Mundra route or through the Bombay route. So are we actually, where do we go next from here, and what is the future for trade, and what is it that we can commit to the traders in these border areas who have committed their lives and livelihoods to this trade? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nikita. Ravindra Pandita ji. Pandita ji, to mic chuno on ke?
Okay. Namaskar and adab to everyone. I hope I am audible now.
Mara, bilkul audible.
Okay. And especially my adab to Abdul Basit Sahab. I met him. I now recently met his counterpart right now, Charge DFS Aftab Khan, also twice. And I think out of the whole discussion, what I feel, it's the people-to-people contact which will matter. I'm continuing with Nikita's, issue. LOC trade and LOC travel should begin. We have a treaty between two countries. That's the biggest CBM since 2007. Now, unfortunately, it is suspended presently. And I hope we add an addendum to the treaty by allowing cross-LOC pilgrimages also. I have been working on Sharda mission, and I have put this question and discussed with Abdul Basit Saab also once or twice. I have discussed with the present charge DFS also. I am in contact with the people over there across LOC. I have a civil society of about 150 members. Those are the people who have laid flowers for us. You installed Sharda Mai's picture there. We have Supreme Court POK's order. We have DG archaeology order. But unfortunately, we are not progressing too much on that side. I think everyone needs to work as a civil society. Rest of the academic discussions and all that, those continue and do add to it. But primarily, it is, as Abdul Basit Saab raises again and again, Kashmir issue, LOC peace we have been able to achieve this year. And I think we need to start LOC trade and travel immediately for the divided families, and add to it the pilgrimages. Sharda Peeth is closed. Nowhere in the world, in any of the conflict zones, prayer has been stopped even for a day, be it Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Church of Turkey or any other place. Why Sharda Peeth is closed since 1948 for the last 72 years? Now, this question has been raised with both the governments, and I think governments need to think on it. Being a biggest confidence building major, it's not only of religious importance, it's of heritage importance. And I think we need to preserve the shared heritage between India and Pakistan.
Thank you, Mara.
Explore more and more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are just waiting for us, Munisi, to join in. But let me say that we are entering the 75th year of our independence. And when partition happened, obviously the Congress party and the national movement accepted the partition, grudgingly, but also because they thought that the benefits of partition would probably exceed the costs of remaining united together. There are many of those like Aisha Jalal, who, for instance, have argued that the leader of the Muslim League, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, had actually didn't think of partition or didn't want Pakistan as an independent state at that stage, but more was using it as a negotiating ploy to ensure better rights or better federal relations within undivided India. But I think generally, from what Jinnah's own speech on the 11th of August in the Constituent Assembly, Nehru's speech, the Tryst of Destiny speech, there was a feeling that there will be a new, despite the butchery that was witnessed during the months of partition, that there would be a new beginning. That perhaps as modern, independent nation states that had agreed to live separately, but together in one neighborhood, they would live in a friendly atmosphere. That hope, unfortunately, as we all know, as we witness every day, has been belied. And that's where I pose this counterfactual to Ambassador Raghavan, not in a way of questioning, which Pakistanis often assume that you are questioning the identity of Pakistan. No. But after all, serious scholarship serious intellectual engagement must reflect on mistakes of the past. And if mistakes have been committed, learn lessons for the future. You cannot obviously undo partition. But was the hurry to get the British out, or was the British in a hurry to move out, which led to this abrupt cartographic division of India? And now that there is revisionist writing on both Mountbatten, Radcliffe, and all the various kind of British historical narratives, it's a moment to explore that fundamental question. Mr. Basit, would you, as I said, with all respects to the academic part of this question, rather than in any way reflecting on the fact that Pakistan and India are two independent states, sovereign states in the international system, is this something that would capture your imagination? If as I said during this conversation, I suggest that you collaborate with Ambassador Raghavan on perhaps leading a project like this.
Maybe we can always collaborate. Shouldn't be a problem. But to what objective? Obviously, these are very hard questions. And even Qaid Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, till the very last moment, June 1946, when we had the cabinet mission, he was willing to give up the demand of Pakistan. But unfortunately, the Congress was not very forthcoming to the cabinet mission recommendations. And then the Muslim League was left with no option but to continue with the separate homeland. Obviously, these are questions, historically speaking, I'm sure they would add value to our research, academic research. But it is also important to be forward-looking. I may have sounded, very pessimistic in my opening remarks about the future of Pakistan and their relations. That was not my purpose. As a career diplomat, former diplomat, it's part of my training to be always optimistic about even difficult of circumstances, situations. And I still hope that Pakistan and India can work out something positive, so that to put this relationship on an irreversible positive trajectory of moving forward. The problem with this relationship is that we have tried almost every approach in our relationship, and nothing has really worked. And this is my point of contention, that what new we can really try. We have tried people-to-people relations, we have tried everything, but everything will come back to square one and start again, try to start again. So we need to get out of this vicious cycle, in my view. And unless there is desire, courage on both sides of the border, I do not see that happening. That's why I'm trying to give a reality check to my friends across the border. That in Pakistan, we believe that bilateralism to solve the Kashmir knot, all that we have exhausted. Bilateralism perhaps would not deliver the results we are aspiring to get through bilateral talks. Hence, we may be, as one of our speakers said, that perhaps it is time for the two countries to look behind the scenes, to engage some third party. I know India is averse to this third party mediation suggestion, but I think we have come to a situation where to me it now looks inevitable, because we have exhausted bilateralism. Whatever opportunities existed in the past, I do not see those recurring somehow, coming in front of us. To me, the present impasse is very, very difficult to break, in my view. And unless there is a third party involvement, engagement, though behind the scenes, I do not see how, because even the Shimla agreement in Pakistan, people are talking about denouncing and resigning or from the Shimla Agreement itself. Because I have attended many conferences, there are many seminars in Pakistan, and people are very forcefully suggesting that Pakistan should formally revoke the Shimla Agreement because it has outlived its utility now. And we should take this mantra of bilateralism away from India. After 5th August 2019, it has lost its utility to our bilateral relations. So, India has kind of, complicated the entire bilateral relationship by taking the steps on 5th August 2019. And many in Pakistan would think it is now it is on India to see as to how it can break the current deadlock. I know that there are great minds on the other side of the border, and like Professor Matu, yourself, and you have been involved in different ways in this relationship. And since some of you come from Kashmir as well, so I think it is high time for former diplomats, former armed forces people, academics, historians to come together. Perhaps we can form a group to suggest, we can be more creative this time around, rather than trying the same old stuff again and again and expecting different results. That is not going to happen. So I am for new ways, creative ways to really, find a trajectory which just keeps which helps moving the two countries forward. And resolving our problems which continue to bedevil our relationship. And that is so unfortunate, frankly speaking. As a former Pakistan High Commissioner to India, it pains me to see. Yeah. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We've been joined by Muneze Jahangir. Muneze ji, in your absence, I had actually requested you to begin this forum. And I said not only because I think you are champion of the independent media, but also, don't mind me sounding patronizing, but because I have been a great admirer of Asma Jahangir ji. I would almost have the temerity of calling her a friend of mine, but certainly she was a friend of all South Asians. She stood up for the values that we all hold dear. And in fact, Ambassador Raghavan also began his remarks by paying tribute to the outstanding work of Asma ji, which is in no way, in any way, suggesting that you yourself, as a independent media figure, and we've seen your reporting on NDTV, and now you're with the Dawn Group, are not only following your mother's footsteps, but have carved out a niche and an identity for yourself, which we all respect. The three questions that I had posed to all the other panelists, and I would request you to address those and then perhaps look beyond, but within the next 7 to 10 minutes. His first question is, after 75 years of independence, how do you reflect on these years? Is it still Daag Daag Ujala, Ye Shab Kazida Seher? Is that moment of dawn not arrived in our relationship? What is the net assessment after 75 years of bilateral relations? Secondly, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? Ambassador Basit has suggested that there is very little light, while Ambassador Raghavan and General Singh and Smita ji have suggested, in varying degrees, a tube light, many bulbs, or perhaps a floodlight, as Ambassador Raghavan, eternal optimist, would suggest. And finally, we are witnessing the biggest humanitarian tragedy on our borders in Afghanistan. Perhaps the biggest since East Pakistan, or when Bangladesh was created. Are we just going to be spectators while this tragedy unfolds, or is there a moment of opportunity where Kabul or Kandahar or Mazar or Herat can bring us together? Is there a new opportunity? Ambassador Raghavan thought that it's not central to the relationship. Afghanistan is a side player in a bilateral relationship, essentially. But we want your views on this, as especially because I think you represent a different Pakistan. You're muted, ma'am. You're muted, ma'am.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on this space, and thank you so much, Ambassador Raghavan, for saying those kind words about my mother. She was a very good friend of yours, and she wished for an India and Pakistan that could coexist peacefully. Thank you, Amitabh Saab, also for your kind words. And she fought a lifetime for peace between India and Pakistan, and she believed in it. And she also believed in it because she felt, and I think, I've heard her say this so many times, and it now rings true as the Americans are leaving Afghanistan, that men start wars but do not know how to end it, and women are then left picking up the pieces, trying to get the generations to go forward, and that's exactly what is happening. Let's begin by Afghanistan. There is always light at the end of the tunnel. How could there not be? We live here. We want to be a part of this South Asia. And there can be no other way. I feel that the younger generation today is not even like my generation. For them, borders exist as far as they do not or allow somebody into a certain country. They exist because you have visas. But when it comes to exchanging ideas, I have seen it in my own lifetime. The internet has changed the world entirely. I can connect to anybody at any given time, anywhere in the world, and have associations which are not defined by borders. So I think that the younger generation is going to grow up very differently. So I do believe that there is light at the end of the tunnel, because what brings communities together is not just nation states now. It is also ideas. It is also a yearning for peace. It is a yearning for opportunities. And unfortunately, Pakistan and India are a tale of missed opportunities. And that's what my mother believed. I remember that when at the end of the Kargil war, she was one of the founding members of this peace bus that brought women of Pakistan to India, and then the women of India came to Pakistan with messages of peace, and they said that we do not want to be part of the war narrative or the economy. We want to talk about the future. We want to talk about peace. When I look at the 75 years of India and Pakistan, and a lot of people say that with policymakers, with India and Pakistan, it's almost like a schizophrenia. Ya pappi hai ya jhappi hai. There seems to be nothing in between. That clinical approach to India and Pakistan relations is not there. It's far more emotional, which is good in a way and bad in a way. But I do believe that in the recent past, there has been, at least from the Pakistani side, a willingness to move forward, whether it be from Prime Minister Imran Khan or whether that be from the military establishment here in Pakistan, or whatever the reasons for that is. But it seems like the penny has dropped in Pakistan, that finally there is a realization even amongst the military establishment that if you want to prosper in South Asia, then trade is the answer. Then you will have to do trade with your own neighbors. And I remember when I went to the United States to interview Hillary Clinton, and we were given a briefing. The question that we were asked was, well, why is it that you do not do trade with your own neighbors? Why do you want to do trade with the United States? And I think that India and Pakistan have held the entire, and this is one thing that we keep hearing, has held the entire South Asia back. So that is why I believe that there is hope and there is an opportunity, because the next generation wants to move forward and economically benefit from how the world is going to be connected. And the establishments, whether they are right-wing, and in both countries they are right-wing, I think that there is a realization that if that does not happen, both countries will suffer. I'm not so sure about India, but definitely here in Pakistan, there is that realization. Now, what do we do about terror? There is a fear, I think, and there is an opportunity there also. That in Afghanistan, we can, and we have worked against each other in Afghanistan. It has been the battlefield for, and the proxy war has been fought in Afghanistan. But there is an opportunity where there can be a convergence of interests in Afghanistan between Pakistan and India. Unfortunately, that is not the reality today. Unfortunately, the Taliban, we are being accused of supporting the Taliban. And in some places, of course, it is true because the Taliban have been here in Pakistan. They have their wives here. We have delivered them to the negotiating table. It is true. What is going to happen in Afghanistan is, I fear, because we have friends there. Most of our friends who have fought against the Taliban have fled from there. We are hearing news about the way women have been hunted down, women who have been outspoken there by the Talibs, and how there are going to be revenge killings of women who have spoken out against them. So there is an opportunity, but I think the opportunity is not unfortunately, amongst states. I think it is among civil society. And I think that the civil society who do not want extremism in Pakistan and in Afghanistan should now come together and give their support to people who want peace in Afghanistan. And to the women of Afghanistan, they should not become the collateral damage of what has happened there. And there needs to be South Asians who should stand up and say that if this does happen, and women will be the first line that will fall to this extremism, we will be next. And mind you, if there is going to be terror groups running amok in Afghanistan, neither will we be safe and neither will you be safe. There will be attacks in Pakistan through the TTP. There will be attacks, and I hope they will not be. But we fear that there will be attacks also in India. And the idea that somehow borders, barriers can contain them, history has shown you otherwise. They cannot. Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, they do not recognize the border. And they have been very good at infiltrating them. So I think that this, I would say this infrastructure of terror that does not recognize border has to be looked at from a regional perspective and not just as a country-specific problem. And therefore, I believe that there is time that people who have worked and believed in a South Asian approach or in peace in South Asia, now is the time to find a common ground, a common response to what is happening in Afghanistan and to the terror network. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Unize, for that wonderfully refreshing views. But please stay on till we conclude the session, because I'm sure there will be lots of questions and request you for your intervention again. In the meanwhile, may I ask Ambassador Raghavan and then General Singh if they want to respond to what both Munize Jahangir and Abdul Basit have said, and Ambassador Raghavan, to put you on the spot again about the question that I raised.
Well, thank you, and thank you for asking me first about counterfactuals and what if there had been no partition. You see, counterfactuals like revisionist history, it's like chess or bridge. There's a certain addictiveness to it, but in the end, it's a tactical game. There are no real takeaways from counterfactuals. So if you ask the question, what if, I would say that, it depends on where you're standing. If you're saying, what if there was no partition? And then, so when do we go back? If we go back, for instance, to 1st January 1947, there was no partition then, but the atmosphere in the country was totally communalized. And in fact, there was a considerable body of opinion which may now appear to have disappeared, or maybe silent, or maybe underground, but there was a considerable body of opinion who thought that that a partition is the only way out. Now, whenever something catastrophic like the massacres which take place happens, there is obviously a blame game involved. I mean, it's like in the United States, who lost Vietnam, or the question which is now going to be ricocheting off the chancelleries in different parts of the world, who lost Afghanistan, how much are the British to blame, how much is the Congress to blame. But the fact is, through most of the 20th century, and especially from the 1920s onwards, the political atmosphere and the social atmosphere was steadily polarized and communalized, and so much so that by the mid-40s, it was possibly difficult to think of a single entity anymore. Now, you can go further back. There are those who argue, there's this wonderful new book which has come out about the loss of Hindustan, and so on. You can go back further in time and try to imagine a mythical golden past. But when you investigate it carefully, you will find that there was no such thing in actual reality. The fact is that the leadership, both in India and in Pakistan, had very definite views about nation building, quite apart from the religious question. And which is why the cabinet mission plan, which Abdul Basit referred to, was doomed from the start, because it imagined a loose kind of confederation, which the then leadership in India certainly did not envisage as being a practical way forward, given the pressing tasks of economic development which lay ahead. So I would say a counterfactual of that kind, it's nice, and one can talk about it a great deal, but really takes away from the substance of today's discussion to some extent, because it's also something which we in India like to. I remember one of my JNU professors had once come to Lahore, and he was asked a question in a seminar that, Professor, what do you really think of partition? And my former teacher replied that he said that I think it was the greatest tragedy which came upon the subcontinent. And the questioner then said, but this is where the problem begins, that you think it was a tragedy. I think it was a liberation. So you see, India and Pakistan cannot reconcile their views of history. And there will be very diametrically and radically opposed views of history. And to some extent, the Kashmir issue is related to that, because the way you read the history of Jammu and Kashmir in the 20th century is quite different from the way people in Pakistan would read it. And as I said, you cannot reconcile these two perspectives. You can get the best minds in the world together. And Abdul Basit spoke about a third party role. You can get you can get all the Einsteins together, but they will not be able to find a solution, because the best minds in India and Pakistan have attempted it and come to the conclusion that this is a problem to which there is no solution just now. So if you accept that point, that there are certain problems which you cannot resolve, then arises the question of choices. What choices do the government and the people exercise? And I think really we are at that juncture, and we have been in that juncture for the last 8-10 years, that what choices do you want to exercise? I think a more useful exercise to do right now is to look at what are the choices which have been exercised when confronted with these situations elsewhere in the world. Now, Indians and Pakistanis, by their nature, are not good learners. we don't like to hear what other people's experience is and try to draw certain lessons from that. But I think it is useful to look at how countries manage intractable issues, because the alternative otherwise is that you see a repeat of the past for some more time. And I do think it's possible to underestimate the capacity for attrition which both India and Pakistan have. I mean, you can go on like this conceivably forever. Stephen Cohen wrote a book about 20 years ago, India and Pakistan fighting for a century, and at that time many people laughed about it. But now that appears more of a reality than it did then. So I do think it's a far more serious issue than one in which you can put the entire onus.
Am I the only one who's lost Ambassador Raghavan, or is there a...
No, I think his signal is gone.
Okay. General Singh, would you like to respond a little right now?
I would like to flag two issues. I'll not go into academic part of it, because academically, if partition had not happened, there are many things, like China wouldn't have risen like this. There would have been a second pole to China in the neighborhood. Our two armies would have been so formidable. We had shared legacies and traditions. So all that was there. And demographically for India to manage this big population chunk would have been a challenge. So I would leave that out, because my family came from that side. We suffered in that trauma. And the command that I commanded, Western Command, was raised to manage partition. So partition has its own challenges, but let's leave this out. Let me flag two important things which I want to flag really. One is this demand in Pakistan of calling off Shimla Agreement. It couldn't be, it is very inopportune and very immature, because in India, the major narrative is that in Shimla Agreement, we gave away far too much. We did not utilize our leverages properly. If that happens, then what is stopping from Indians to say that jettison Indus Water Treaty? There's already a parliamentary committee which has said that there is no need to stick to this Indus Water Treaty. So if we are going to call off treaties like this, it's going to be very dangerous, because all of us have read that book where one Pakistani diplomat told DP Dhar or somebody that essence of diplomacy is putting your fingers in bird's nest and making bird feel so comfortable, and then tactfully withdrawing your fingers along with the eggs. So this is what Indians feel about Shimla Agreement. So let's leave that out, and let's not bring up issues like trying to call off Shimla Agreement, because then the counter is going to be also generated. As it is, the narrative is very vitiated. The second point I want to flag is that, of course, we should think of reviving the trade, but these border economies have got mixed up in things like narcotics, running of guns, and whatever mechanisms we put in place, full body scanners and all such mechanisms, because we have been importing wagons of cement which have contained narcotics, which have contained explosives. So there has to be a better mechanism, because I'm not saying everybody is in this game. It follows Pareto's law. 80% people are genuine traders, but 15% tend to get compromised, even if temporarily. Like this, what is going on now, some people in Srinagar, traders, have been nabbed for Hawala kind of transactions. So we have to put in place mechanisms which ensure that trade is not sullied with these kind of things. So I'll leave these 2 points, that don't jettison agreements in a hurry, and if you want to revive the trade, put in place appropriate security and confidence building measures. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Hafsa Akram, who's apparently logged in from Pakistan, to intervene. But first of all, introduce himself so that we know who you are, sir. Secondly, I would also recommend the book of Manan Ahmed Sufi, is it? Or Asif, on the Loss of Hindustan, which suggests that before the Europeans came, there was a robust South Asian identity. I haven't read the book, but I have read reviews which commend the book, as you have, Ambassador Raghavan. So at some stage, perhaps you can reflect more critically on whether you believe it's a persuasive thesis.
You want me to come in now or later?
After Hafsa Akram. I'll ask you to come. Hafsa Akram.
Thank you so much, sir. I am from Pakistan. I am currently doing MSc in International Relations. So I am so interested in...
Why don't you show us your video? I mean, you have an interesting screensaver, but if you could show your face up as well, it'll be, if you don't mind, or is that something that not possible?
Sorry, it is not possible.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay.
So you're doing MA in International Relations.
I think I want to give some suggestions so that both countries move forward in future, and it has time come to move forward. Firstly thing is that the media play a negative role so much. Media must be brought some positive things, and media always spread hatred and does some propaganda from both sides, not only one side. So media have to do some positive way so that people the civil society may have a less hatred for India and Pakistan both. And second thing is the many undemocratic people also interfere in foreign policy there. If they do not interfere, so that the civilian government will move forward for future.
Thank you very much, Hafsa Saiba. There are two themes apart from the many other themes that emerge. One is, of course, media, and the other is trade. Now, these have been, trade has always been seen as a panacea, especially because you had the example of functionalism or neo-functionalism create the European Union, and everyone thought that if you have greater stakeholding in stability through economics and trade, the chances of conflict being accentuated is less. That hasn't happened in the India-Pakistan case. Now, the media was the other. The puzzle used to be when I began traveling to Pakistan, which is in the early 90s, 91, 92, you didn't have access to Pakistani newspapers. The internet wasn't there. So you had Public Opinion Trends, which was published by Sushant Sarin's dear father, which was to publish extracts from Pakistani papers. So one great demand of academics, scholars, everyone was allow a free export-import of newspapers, because that will build us an understanding, a greater engagement with what are the domestic concerns impacting on each other's societies, people, and that will bridge differences. We don't know each other, we don't know about each other. Smita and Monize, this is a question for you too. 30 years later, we've come full circle. Now we say media is the problem. From media being a source of creating understanding, which was the intuitive view in the early 90s, let Dawn come to India, let Times of India, the Hindu go to Pakistan, and that will help people understand each other. Now they say, oh, television channels are the biggest source of accentuating tension between the two countries. I want you to respond not in a way of blaming people, but how, in a more reflective way on how does one actually look at the media and what role, constructive role that it can play perhaps in building this relationship, or at least not accentuating the conflictual dimensions of this relationship. But I'll come to both of you after I have asked Ambassador Raghavan to reflect on the idea that there was a South Asian identity which was literally punctured by the European intervention and a sort of communal division of South Asia virtually through the various Portuguese, French, and of course then the masterly British insidious imperialism. And is that a golden past that we can reimagine? Ambassador Raghavan.
Well, I'm very skeptical about these imagined pasts. This book I spoke about, The Loss of Hindustan, that there was this view of South Asia before European intervention. But then why stop with Hindustan? There is a view in India, and it has a certain amount of substance to it, and which is this other imagined community called Bharatvarsh, which may be 2,000 or 3,000 years old. But those who wish to go back to that imagined community lead to further polarizations today. So I don't think we should look for solutions to present day problems in the past, or try to imagine a past which was without any problems. I think the history of South Asia has been a history of great conflict, as indeed it has been a history of great cooperation and people living together. And you can't somehow erase out the conflicted parts of our history and look only at the cooperative parts of our history. The same applies to India and Pakistan today. And this was what I was going to say when my connection snapped, that there is a view that somehow that the India-Pakistan problem is an interstate problem. And it's not a people's problem, or it's not a civil society problem. It's not so at all. Because if one examines the nature of the problem, you will find that in both India and in Pakistan, what the governments say or do has an enormous amount of public support. In respective positions about Jammu and Kashmir in both India and Pakistan, there is about as strong a national consensus in either country as you will get anywhere in the world. So I don't think there is any easy solution. And what Abdul Basit had said about these views in Pakistan about the Simla Agreement, but you see, India-Pakistan relations or India-Pakistan issues did not begin in 1971. They have a previous history of at least a quarter of a century before that. So whatever is done or not done with the Simla Agreement is not going to go to the substance or to the core of the relationship. And the core of that relationship is, as I said, is that there are foundational and deep-rooted intellectual and ideological divergences between the two countries. Now, one way is to continue to harp on the differences and remain stuck in a attrition-driven approach. The second is to recognize the differences and then try to find your way around them while recognizing that these differences make for an accident-prone relationship. On trade, I just have one point to make, and I'm sorry if it sounds negative. But I've always felt that trade is something to be supported, and it can lead to certain multiplier effects. But I don't think trade by itself is going to address the political issues or the political differences which exist. And if you look at examples again around the world, you can look at Japan and China. Their political differences remain as formidable as they were 40 or 50 or 70 years ago, despite an enormous amount of trade and investment which takes place between the two countries. And I think India and Pakistan, no matter how much they trade, the political differences will always have a kind of autonomous domain which has to be addressed on its own terms.
Thank you. Muneze has left the meeting, has she? Aditya, can you call her back to the meeting so that she can answer some of the questions?
Definitely.
And in the meanwhile, I'll request Smita and then also Ambassador Basit, in case there's any other points and any other questions from the audience. Please feel free to put them in the chat box, and then I'll invite you or read out your questions depending on how coherent they are. Smita, media, please.
Thank you, Professor Mattu. This is a question which is often asked and allegations that are often traded, and ours is a very thankless profession in many ways. Now, I do accept that, of course, the debates, the discourses in media itself, in particular on Indian television on prime time. In Pakistan, there are cases, but we clearly have overshadowed them. That's one area where the Indian television studios have overshadowed. And I think the Pakistanis should be happy if there are visa restrictions, that, if they should stay away from some of the TV channels, if those editors, maybe it would actually be helpful if we were to see less of each other on TV, perhaps in the news section, so to say. But it's an unfortunate thing to say, because personally, I have always tried, and I can't take responsibility for what others are doing. I remind people that, when you talk of media, please remember media extends beyond television today. There is a lot of positive, in fact, stories that is going out there on the independent web media outlets. The newspapers still have a way more, in fact, sober take on the issues of the day. On television, we need to understand that what we see in terms of the primetime circus, and especially when it comes to India-Pakistan relations, are a lot of issues that impact relations between India and its other neighbors. We have seen it with Nepal, we have seen it with Bangladesh. These TV channels, unfortunately, are also the channels that fall into the nationalist category. And many of their editors get their diktats, get their messages also from the very top leaders, from those in power. So to me, it's also a question of not just trying to put the media in the box and saying that, is it the media that is causing these friction? Yes, the media may be sensationalizing. Yes, the media may be driving a deeper wedge. But these problems are there. And these problems are also there because of the policymakers who are shaping up what is happening on a bilateral level. These problems are also there because of what the politicians at the end of the day, civil society, media persons, we can all sit together in a cordial atmosphere. But if the political space for negotiating, the political space for actually showing willingness to move forward on a trajectory of some sort of a sustainable normalcy and peace is not there, it becomes a chicken and egg situation. I mean, I do remember that when in 2017, the Depsang standoff happened between India and China. We came back from the United States because Prime Minister Modi had visited. It was his first visit to meet Donald Trump, the president then. When we came back, because India, a lot of television news had been making a lot of noise on the China story. There was a background meeting for media that had been called, and there was a briefing that took place by top diplomats and bureaucrats with a lot of the editors of these so-called noisy channels, where they were essentially said that, can you tone down and temper down your approach to the story? My problem is, the similar thing can be said to a lot of these noisy channels, even on the Pakistan story. It's not said. Because obviously, as I said, there is a premium attached to the Pakistan rhetoric compared to the other equations. It also brings me back to the question which is often termed as the CNN body bag effect. How much really can the media influence when it comes to foreign policy and defense policy, barring situations which may involve a humanitarian crisis, evacuation of citizens from certain conflicts or hotspots? But my hope really in all of this, just to end my comment, I think picking up what Munize said, we are living in times where the internet manages to breach borders, where you may not be able to travel physically. It does not stop you from the flow and exchange of ideas. A young girl partying with her friends somewhere in Pakistan and making an Instagram video saying, "Paudi ho rahi hai," captures the imagination of youth in India. And you see so many music videos follow. Somewhere a young girl in Kashmir saying, "I love to suffer," or "I love to travel," again goes viral. These are different ways where you can still reach out to each other, have a conversation with people, try and break stereotypes. I do try, when Dilip Kumar Sahib passed away, on his demise, I did a conversation with South Asians, because his was a legacy which wasn't just about India or Pakistan. It was a South Asian legacy. So for the some voices that are still trying to do, the bigger problem area today is, I think there is a lot of fear of being bullied that has come in, unfortunately, into our public discourse. Yeah. As reporters, a reporter in Pakistan should have equal freedom to ask about internet disruptions or human rights issues in Kashmir, just as an Indian journalist must have the freedom to ask about what's happening in Gilgit-Baltistan to what's happening in Balochistan, yeah, without being tagged and called and abused on social media and being called all kinds of agents. That space for us to be able to do our duties and questions, unfortunately, is also shrinking at a very fast pace.
Thank you, Smita. That's really deeply valuable views. And let me now just try and bring it all full circle and ask what my favorite professor used to ask. And this is, of course, with due deference to all those who have strong religious sentiments, the God question. If you were God and you were omnipotent, what would you do to fix relations between India and Pakistan? General Saab, since the army is the nearest thing that we have to an institution which has some omnipotence, please, you could begin. If you were God and had wanted to fix the relations in South Asia, what were the 2-3 steps that you would take?
I would personally believe that the solution of soft borders, which was proposed at one stage, and where Pervez Musharraf and Manmohan Singh had reached some kind of an agreement, and then it got spiked, could be invested in the sense we are already in some formulation like that. Ladakh is separate, Jammu and Kashmir, we can think of sort of people-to-people trade, provided the ceasefire on LOC holds. It is already held for close to 6 months. There have been just minor incidents. So it's a time for Pakistan Army to put the buck where it has been saying. It has been saying that there is a fatigue. There is a need to get back to economic issues. And they have a challenge which may seem not so formidable at this stage, but it is indeed formidable. So you have to look at this towards your west. You have to think of fallouts of what is going to happen in Afghanistan. It may be a good idea at this stage, and even Chinese would maybe incline towards that if CPAC has to come back, even if India doesn't want to be part of it, CPAC needs to have security. And that can only come if we at least temporarily give up all these things and work around agreements and give a chance to resolve Kashmir issue in a better framework. That's how I would like to look at it. Because the thing is, more than Kashmir, there is also a constituency which is in Punjab. Punjabis this side and that side. There was a stage that there was going to be inter-Punjab games also. And some kind of sports exchanges had taken place. And there is also this script which is called Shahmukhi. We speak Gurmukhi and we write it in a particular way. On Pakistan side, there is Shahmukhi, which is Punjabi written in Urdu. And that mirrors the regional aspirations across the border. So if somehow Shahmukhi, Gurmukhi, Punjabi's exchange becomes meaningful, that will, because after all, who is driving this entire thing, this conundrum? It is actually Punjabis in a big way. I'll just try and finish that. Punjabis in a big way. So can we soften it up through exchanges in Punjab? So that's where I'll leave it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Amitabh Mattu sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Jansa. Munise Jahangir has joined back. Munise, are you there?
Yes, I'm very much there. I'm sorry we had a power cut.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you, of course, there was a side on the media and how the media can play a more positive role, but we've reflected on that. But I'm going to ask you what I term and if it doesn't offend anyone's religious sensibilities, the God question. If you were God and you were omnipotent, what would you do? What would be the 3 steps or 4 steps that you take to fix South Asia?
Well, I mean, thank God I'm not God, because I think God will have much to do. So, I mean, I'm not going to ponder too much on that question. But, before I got disconnected, you asked a very interesting question to my colleague also, Smriti. So I would like to address that, because I think that Smriti and I have both seen the media transform itself. I mean, we both came in when electronic media, came about, and then the social media and etc. So we've seen those transitions, and I have to say that what has happened over the years, with more right-wing governments coming in from both sides of the divide, that they have encouraged elements within the media to take a hawkish position on India and Pakistan, whether that be Pakistan or whether that be India, and it is applauded by the state on either side. And what is amazing to me is that there is a misconception which is quite widely perceived both in India and Pakistan, that somehow we are the ambassadors and we are supposed to portray a good image of either country. I mean, that is the job of a diplomat. It is not the job of the media to portray a good image of the country. Our job is just to report, to tell the truth, to have opinions and analysis based on factual positions, to raise our flags high. We are neither soldiers, we are neither emissaries. So I think that misconception is not just in the public, it's also, I mean, it's something that the policy makers say that this is what we should do. They are illiterate about the way the media works. They do not understand the way the media works, how it is supposed to work. And I think that is one of the problems we face. Now, when you say that the media has become hysterical, I can tell you that any professional journalist with an editor, whole idea, you have to prove your nationalism by giving gali to the other, by abusing the other state, has been encouraged by right-wing elements on both sides of the divide. And I think that is one thing that is very sad. What else has happened in India and Pakistan is that opinion has overtaken reportage. So before, we would report on so many stories of India and Pakistan, but at the moment, there is more opinion on what I think about India and what Smriti may think about Pakistan. There is not enough reporting of what has happened on either side of the divide, and the people of India and Pakistan have been left out of this shouting match. Before, there were stories on either side of divided families, of people who have suffered due to the tensions between India and Pakistan, and that stories, they were abandoned. Nobody tells them anymore. It's not like these people disappeared, that divided families in Kashmir disappeared, that people are not stuck on either side of the divide without visas. But what took over were screaming, talking heads. So I think that this is not just because it's an India-Pakistan question. Of course, India and Pakistan, the peace in India and Pakistan has been the biggest victim of this, but this is how the cookie has crumbled in the national electronic media in both countries, and that is very scary, moving forward for somewhat of a sane conversation on both countries.
Thank you, Munezi. Those very, very valuable comments. So, although you didn't take up the more provocative part of the question, especially the idea that if God was a woman, what would she do? Ambassador Raghavan, would you like to take up that rather provocative question?
Well, there are some answers in the chat box to that question, and one of them said that God would erase history, which reminds me very much of what Mahatma Gandhi wrote in jail once in 1923. He was in communal riots were breaking out all across the country post the Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement. And he has this wonderful sentence which says that happy is the nation which has no history. So I think if I was God, I would try to erase at least some of the subcontinent's history.
Fantastic. History and memory.
And memory.
Yeah.
Quite true.
Thank you. Apparently, our friends from Sri Lanka are present here in a robust manner, and they are keen to ask questions. So could someone identify, is that Rohite Abasinghe or Sumit Jaishekhara? Any one of you who wants to ask a question? I'll just look at the chat box. Dr. Ramesh Kumar wants to ask a question.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I have written in a chat box, who will come forward to resolve the issues?
Okay, I think that's a good question. Now, I think, Aditya, there doesn't seem to be that enthusiasm from our friends from Sri Lanka, who are quite content to remain in their more peaceful island at the moment. There's a question from Dushyant to Ambassador Basit and Ambassador Raghavan. What are the mistakes of both governments, in your opinion, in the past 75 years? Maybe we can learn. That's now, I think, a little late in the day to begin answering that question. Someone unknown sender says, I need to leave to prepare for my own daily show. Oh, that's Smita. Sorry. Smita. Okay, I think everyone, it's obviously reached a point at which I think we should bring this to a closure. And if there are panelists...
Amitabh, if you allow, I really thought about what you asked.
Yes,
sometimes
please.
You need time to think, I think if I was God, I would open the borders. I think that's what I would do. I would allow people to meet. I would allow people to find their own solutions. And I do believe that the majority of South Asia does not want war. They want peace. They want to move ahead. They want trade. They want opportunities for their young. I really do believe it. I do not think that the vitriolic of the right wing rules.
Open the borders, erase history, have a permanent sense of amnesia about the past. These are the ways forward if you could do what you want.
Maybe stop the partition bloodshed. I don't know if stopping the partition would have been a solution. Moving forward, it may still have been an issue.
But we're not talking about what God would have done in the past. It's God in the future.
God in the future, of course, I think just put the top leaders in one room and force them to talk and not allow them to leave till they come to a solution. So just make sure that they were holed up in a room and said that, you're not going to come out till you solve the issue today. So we're not letting you out.
Vikrantji, do you have a view from the Trikuta Hills? What would, if you were speaking for Mata Vaishno Devi, what would she say? What would the steps that she would recommend?
Well, I would say, taking a totally non-biased kind of view, too much blood has flown under the bridge, so to say. There's been so much bloodshed and so much mistrust between the countries. It's high time that both the countries got their act together. Instead of wasting money on arms, ammunitions and things of that kind, the spending should be focused on social infrastructure, on improving the lives of their citizens, rather than fighting over issues which are of historical nature. It's time to move ahead. You cannot undo the past, and it's time to put a full stop wherever it is. Try and resolve border issues, and the only possible solution to my mind for that is convert the LOC as your de facto international border. What is with whom stays there, and you move on in life. I mean, it's not humanly possible for two nuclear powers to say today that we are going to get POK liberated, or for Pakistan to say that they can take an inch of Kashmir from us. It's not going to happen. So,
Professor Amitabh Mattu, if I could just take one minute
please.
intervention. If Islamabad if Islamabad could stop listening to Pindi, if Pindi House diktats reduce and Islamabad does what people of Pakistan want, things will improve, sir. Thank you.
I think very innovative, interesting ideas. I think certainly ideas for a book in the making. I don't know whether it's something which we can translate or influence policy with, but I think we have had a very, very insightful, really a discussion full of life, energy, and as always, conducted, I think, in a very amicable, polite manner. I want to thank, before I hand it over to Aditya again, General Kamaljeet Singh, Muneze Jahangir, Smita Sharma, Ambassador Raghavan, Ambassador Basit, who has left, and in his absence, General Asad Durrani, who is also another friend, who actually first said, what are you talking about? Eliminating borders? The ISI has never believed in borders in any case. So, I mean, so you miss him in his absence, but I hope it's for reasons entirely to do with preoccupations and not some constraints regarding the seminar itself. Because I think more important than anything is to come together and share ideas, however impractical, however wild they are. That's what I was taught in university, that there is a sacredness about space, intellectual space, where you can debate about everything, including the fact that if you were God, what would you do? And without being charged for blasphemy, I would imagine. And so I hand over the reins of this absolutely fantastic webinar to the impresario in chief, which is Aditya Ikku.
I think he's muted.
Aditya, you can't mute yourself, man.
Yes, sir. I'll go forward with the vote of thanks then.
Okay.
Respected panelists, correspondents, and everyone who are present here, it's my privilege to have been asked to propose you a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of Global Counter Terrorism Council and the entire team, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all speakers for gracing your important work and sharing with us your findings and openings today. A special mention to all the speakers, Lieutenant General Kamaljeet Singh, Dr. T.C. Raghavan sir, Lieutenant General Asad Durrani, Ambassador Abdul Basit, Smita Sharma, and Muzai Jahangir ma'am, and of course, Professor Amitabh Mattu sir for moderation. I would like to thank all media correspondents, fellow research coordinators, and all the members in the audience who have shown keen interest in this webinar. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to Aditya Tikku sir for perfect logistic support and guidance he has extended to all of us. The webinar wouldn't have been possible without the support of the dear team members, research coordinators, graphic team members, social media team. Thank you all once again for this wonderful session, for beautifully putting out your thoughts. Thank you all.
Thank you.